So why did we decide to put GFA at the front and center in the very first session at the annual conference? We usually don't do that. You're normally hearing from experts in the field in a variety of different areas. We try to bring people here that can add value to your assets, to your land, your timber, your consulting, your logging, whatever it may be. Well, the reason is because we're really in a tremendous time of change. And GFA is working to adapt to that change in a way that's going to affect every single one of you in this room and every single investor in the forest product supply chain in the state of Georgia and maybe beyond this state too as well. So what are we seeing transitions in? What is happening right now? Well, population. You'll see some slides here in a few minutes that have changed, that are really kind of outlay what's changed. We all hear about it, we see it in different ways, but our population in the state is changing rapidly. Politics. Our politics, we hear about it every single day through whatever news feed you use. But politics are probably as divisive as they've been at any point in time in our history, and very, very challenging, not only for us as voters, as citizens, but for our leaders who are elected to office. Land ownership. We're in a period of transition as well on land ownership. Millions of acres going from one generation to the next. Hundreds of millions of acres. Climate. We're dealing with things that we haven't had to deal with before, at scales that we haven't had to deal with before. Investment. Of course, there's been a lot of changes in that area too as well, but as we look at growth of drain, as we look at hotspots, we look at a variety of different things, investment is changing and the profile of those investors is changing. Trade. Right now, it's a very pressing issue for us, affecting the bottom lines of a lot of companies and a lot of landowners as well. Workforce. Where's our future workforce going to come from? What does our current workforce need to do for us today? The types and kinds of workers that we're dealing with are changing rapidly. And finally, consumer preference. And this is probably the one that changes the fastest. One tweet can mean that we're no longer using paper straws, right? Or it can mean that we're all rushing out to get them, right? So anything in that nature, consumer preferences are changing faster than we can even keep up. So in this time of transition, very critical not only on the business side, the political side, the advocacy side, the education side, whatever angle you want to take at it, we have got to be dynamic. And that's what we wanted to talk about today. On the population front, here you can see a great shot of Ponce City Market in the background that's owned by Jamestown, a GFA member. But it highlights how our population is changing. For decades, there was the growth of suburban Atlanta. That's being reversed now to some degree. It'll continue growing, but to some degree, we're starting to reinvest in our cities. We're starting to make them places where people want to live, where they can thrive, where they can change the way that they interact with each other and with our communities. And most importantly on population, what we wanted to show you was a little bit of how we've changed in Atlanta and Georgia, and the best indicator of that is right here in Atlanta. This was Atlanta in 1950. Some of you were alive then. In 1970, we start seeing really the beginning of growth. For a long time, Atlanta was that blue spot, probably since the Civil War, really. But then it started growing tremendously in the 1970s. If you look at pictures of the skyline of downtown Atlanta, the tallest thing in 1975, I think, was that Hyatt Hotel, where it has the round flying saucer restaurant on top. If you look at that today, it looks like almost like a two-story house. It's dwarfed by everything around it. Now 1990, we're starting to get close to the Olympics. We see a tremendous explosion of growth into the outer reaches of Atlanta. By 2000, we're starting to see the growth into Gwinnett, into the northeastern and eastern parts of Atlanta. And then by 2010, just 9 years ago, we start seeing this blue splotch. Now what caught my attention about this blue splotch and the size of Atlanta, look how close that is to Alabama. You have a metro area that's almost starting to reach into other states, into our neighboring states. A tremendous impact. Now also go back and remember what that blue splotch looked like in 1950? Surrounded by all of that were farms and forests. And ask yourself, do you think those people back then, we're talking about what we're about to talk about right here and for the rest of today, what's this land going to look like in 20 years or 30 years or 50 years? They probably didn't see this coming. And it's important for us to make sure that we are aware that this is coming. This isn't going to stop. So we're going to talk about that a little bit more. On politics, one of the closest races for governor that we've seen in a long time, and it's an indicator of a lot of elections that are out there. The margins are much narrower. Who wins and who loses, that close. That close. And that has a huge impact on us as a state. And as I alluded to before, the pressure on politicians is tremendous. We elected one of the biggest freshman classes that we've had in a very long time to the House of Representatives. A lot of those folks were from Metro Atlanta. We hosted a freshman legislator event in Atlanta not too long ago on the last tract of active timberland in Gwinnett County. Almost everyone who came to that event drove less than 30 minutes to get there. It was a tremendous testament to the fact that that's where the power is concentrated and to some degree currently in terms of number of votes. But as we see this turnover of folks that are bowing out of the legislature and new blood coming in, we see folks that maybe have only lived in Georgia 2, 3, 4 years. Very different than we saw 50 years ago, where we basically elected our elders, people that were the leaders in our communities and had been that way for a long time. We'd send them to Atlanta to the state capitol, or they would be named to positions of power of state agencies, and they might be there for a decade, or 15 years, or 20 years, or 40 years. Very, very different than what we're seeing today. Folks that have basically just moved to Georgia, want to be involved, jump in the fray, and get elected in some cases, not in all cases, but we see a little bit of that too as well. Land ownership. This transition is probably, some of you will feel this yourselves as you transition your assets to the next generation. But more than 50%, 441 million acres, is owned by 11 million private partnerships, mostly in the eastern United States. That's what all that green area is there. This came from the U.S. Forest Service data, but 95% of that land is owned by family and individual owners. So that means that as people age out, as they start doing their estate planning, as a lot of things start happening, that starts transitioning. And what have we seen over the last 5 years? From 2013 to 2018, the U.S. Forest Service estimated that 1 out of every 6 acres was sold or transferred. That means that next generation, they may not have the same drive to take care of the land. They may not have the same drive to keep the land. They may see 100 acres as something that could let them have a beach house down here on the coast or on the lake or a new truck or whatever that may be. They may look at it very, very differently. And this is only accelerating. This was over the past 5 years. And now we're in the next phase of that, which is probably even more than that. On the climate side, of course, we've felt and seen this in a way that we wish on no one else ever to happen again, but we can't guarantee that. Hurricane Michael for us, we were not ready for that. And I speak from GFA's perspective, but I think I speak from, I've heard echoes of this from our state agencies, from our leadership in the political realms. Obviously, no landowner was ready for this either. And I don't know that you really can be for 2.4 million acres of damage, for over $800 million dollars of losses, over 7,000 landowners impacted. How do we build resilient systems that are market-based to help us be ready for this in the future and help us be part of the solutions of how we recover and hopefully reduce the damages in the future too as well? You know, Jim Carls said something that stuck with me from one of the first early conversations that we had on early phone calls a couple of days after the hurricane with our state forester and some of the team from GFC. He said this was the single largest timber event catastrophe in the history of the United States. More than Mount St. Helens, more than any disease, more than anything we've ever faced. It was the single largest timber catastrophe in our nation's history. And when's the next time we're going to see another Cat 5 come in through the Panhandle, right? Being ready for that is very important for us. Investment, we've seen a lot of changes in investment over the past few years in terms of how our tax laws shape that. 20 years ago, 30 years ago, we didn't have TMOs. Now we do. In our sector, REITs as well, very active in the space to some degree. And then, of course, once again, folks looking at where to buy timberland. Where's the best place to be invested? And thank you, Forest, for offering this and including us, letting us use this slide, But here you can see, where we have the constrained wood baskets and where we see heavily oversupplied wood baskets. And you can see there that Mississippi and Alabama You see a lot of green. Likewise in North Carolina, once you start getting away from the coast, a lot of green areas. Georgia, Florida tend to still have fairly healthy and robust markets, especially in South Georgia and North Florida, where it gets a little bit weaker the further north we go. But all that starts informing investment decisions. How can we keep timberland if we can't sell the timber on it? And then finally, this is one of the great stories that we have, and I love telling this one to as many people that'll listen. For us, we've had over 45 plus announcements across the 9 southern states of either new sawmills being built or expansions of existing sawmills, and in a couple of cases, openings of mills that have been closed. Once again, thank you, Forrest, for offering this slide as well. But what makes me super excited about this particular slide, if you start counting all those colored dots on there, about a third of all the investments are coming to Georgia. But that is one of the most powerful testaments to what our legislator, our governors have done to make this a positive climate for business, what our technical schools have done to educate and provide workforce in areas all over the state, both rural and urban. It's a testament to our infrastructure. It's a testament to our existing industry that helps create that critical mass of suppliers, of contractors, of experts that can come and troubleshoot. All those things are part of what makes us strong, and it's also part of what's driving investment into this state, and hopefully propping up markets for our products, for our timberlands as well as for products downstream. Workforce. Some of you in the board heard me say this yesterday, and a lot of things that you heard me say yesterday in the board meeting we'll hear echoes of today, and I'll take those messages a little bit further. But workforce is one of those. We're fortunate in Georgia. We have, in terms of manufacturing output and what manufacturing jobs are doing in the state, about $55 billion of output from factories. That's all factories, about 11% of the state's GDP, almost 385,000 jobs. And when we look at what that workforce is putting out through the back end of the gate, it's got to go somewhere. And we're extremely fortunate, and you'll hear a little bit about this later today from the Georgia Ports Authority. But we have the 4th largest port, and Senator Perdue mentioned that yesterday at the annual business session, the 12th largest air cargo hub, one of the largest rail networks in the Southeast, and the 5th largest logistics employer in the United States. So that infrastructure to operate efficiently is at our fingertips. It's right outside the door of our mills. Workforce productivity, one of the most important things for us, and this is what you see if you go into a modern sawmill. You don't see people. You see machines, and you'll see a very active maintenance crew. But in terms of operators, they're sitting behind a screen somewhere, sometimes on the far end of the mill, looking at the mill through screens, not through windows typically. But what's that allowed us to do? Our productivity is much higher than anything we've seen in the past 30 years, and it continues to grow. This is a testament to what we've done with highly trained personnel that can fix, repair, and operate equipment. But it's also a testament to what we've done to be able to get products moved as well throughout our economy. So we'll probably continue to see that line grow over time, and that hopefully will help us balance out where we are on labor. And then when we really think about a changing workforce, it's important to look at these slides. Where is the growth happening? Where are we adding jobs, and where are we losing jobs? The slides that are in gold here will show you where we're adding jobs. And most of those are in kind of metro areas, getting closer to the coast as well. There's a big gap in the middle. It's almost like a missing tooth, if you want to think about it that way. It's hard to ignore. And those white counties, or the counties that are highlighted in white, are ones where we're losing jobs. I want you to note a couple things. The Atlanta and Hub area, Atlanta's at about 10.4% of jobs. That is what's pulling Georgia as compared to the United States at about 9.6%. When we look at rural job growth, though, it's about right at 3%. And so that's what we've seen over the past 5 years. I'll show you a slide in a few minutes of what this looks like moving forward. On trade, obviously trade is critical to us. About 25% of the nation's pulp and paper exports leave from Georgia. That's because we have 12 pulp and paper facilities in the state, and we've got another 4, 5, 6 that are within shooting distance of our borders, buying timber from Georgia, producing products and putting it back on rail and putting it on truck to get to our ports. We also had until this year a very robust and growing log export business too as well. But what's important for us on trade is that, and the reason I mentioned that 25% of the nation's pulp and paper exports leave from Georgia, is that part of that is that our trade with Canada and Mexico is a huge part of that story. And it's not really necessarily Canada, it's more Mexico, because Mexico has no forest and they have no forest products industry. And so most of what we're sending goes into that industry. Most of those boxes that go into, build refrigerators or whatever else are coming back across the border for us. That's wood that came from Georgia to build those boxes. They go down to Mexico, wrap stuff up, and send it right back up to us. So it's very important for us. We've seen an increase from $3.2 billion to $10.1 billion since 1993. China has grown as a major customer, but what does this cause for us? As we've globalized, as we have customers all over the country and all over the world, it's put a lot more questions and a lot more pressure on us to make sure that we're sustainable and being able to prove it, to have documents on it, to be able to audit it. So programs like SFI, FSC, Tree Farm, PEFC are all things that we hear from the customers down the chain. They're all things that they want to see on that product when it hits their stores, when it hits their distribution center, when it goes out to their customers or gets into their processing stream. So consumer preference is the last one I mentioned. And this is probably one of the ones that is probably the funnest for me to track, really, and for us to look at GFA. But consumer preferences, like I said, they change overnight. But they have a huge impact. Because what are we as a nation? A long time ago, we were a nation of manufacturers around World War II. Today, we're a nation of consumers. But we don't only consume the things that we make in this country, we consume products all over the world. And when Americans decide that they want something, the rest of the world changes and listens and adjusts to that almost immediately, as does our economy. And so when Kroger says we're going away from plastic bags, when Starbucks says we're going to have more wood in our cups, in our lids, in our straws, whatever that may be, that's a good thing for forestry. That's a demand driver for us at the end of the day with consumers. Where it really matters is if that consumer knows that they're making a choice in their mind and in their heart that's better for the planet and better for their children. Because that's when you get them to come back the second time, the third time, the fourth time, the fifth time as a consumer. That's when you get them to ask for that extra item, that other item to switch from cement, concrete, steel, plastic to a forest product. And we see that opportunity with mass timber, and we see that opportunity across a lot of different things. I don't know if you guys are ready to change your furniture at home, but you can. If you got grandkids or kids, it's great for them to color on. You don't have to worry about them spilling or anything, But great opportunities for us to really start thinking about what the future of our consumer preferences are. Because I can tell you there's about 330 million consumers out there that are thinking about it a lot every day. So, what does all this mean? That's kind of where we're at to a large degree. What does all this mean for us? Well, I truly believe, and everybody at GFA truly believes, that we are positioned to win. Georgia's got some unique things that are driving us to continue to be the top forestry state in the nation and continue to lead for the rest of the country and maybe even sometimes for the rest of the world. And so in this space, what does that mean? Well, let's take a look at our GDP. Georgia ranks third in GDP across the southern states. But what makes us unique is our diversity. If you look at Florida, $976 billion GDP annually, that's very strong, but heavily dependent on tourism. Heavily dependent on tourism. If you look at Texas, a huge GDP, 160, whatever that is in trillions, I guess, $1.6 trillion a year, but heavily dependent on oil and gas, right? So states that are, that can ebb and flow depending on where one industry takes them. Georgia, we see a lot of diversity across our industry. While we are big in Georgia, we're not the cat's meow here, right? There's a lot of other things: film, the airport, the ports, other manufacturing, Gulfstream. When they export a plane, that's $30 million or more than that sometimes, right? So a lot of other industries that give us a lot of diversity. That diversity also leads to diversity in skill sets, manufacturing, a lot of things. One of the reasons Delta flies all over the world, and they've been able to attract a lot of business here, is because of that diversity that we have in our economy. So you'd see it more compared to North Carolina and Virginia, where you see that same similarity in diversity. But of course, our forest products business in Georgia is a lot larger. The other thing that makes us unique is we're adding a lot of population, and I'll get to that in a minute here. As we look at climate, we're starting to see a lot of other people other than us saying, hey, trees matter. When you're looking at solution sets to what we're going to do about climate, if you're worried about carbon, whatever that may be, trees are a solution set. Recently, Bill Gates issued 5 items that he believes can help drive climate change solutions or carbon solutions at the global scale. 3 of those 5 were we could have a direct correlation from forestry to inform those results, to be a part of that solution. So we see a great opportunity, especially when other people are telling folks, hey, we need to be planting trees. That gives us an opportunity, and more importantly, it gives us an opportunity to say what we do sustainably here in the state of Georgia, what we've been doing for 100 years, and that we do better today than we've ever done, is probably one of the most sustainable industries in the planet. You don't need to be scared of it, you need to embrace it. And so that's a great opportunity. We're at that pivot point right now, where society's starting to think differently about the things that we do, and hopefully starting to accept us. I got an email the other day from someone who went to a water meeting in Savannah, and they were so relieved. They said, 20 years ago, Andres, I would go to this meeting, and forestry was a problem. Everyone in that room was pointing their fingers at foresters, telling them that they were destroying the water quality, that the mills were doing bad things, all these other things. He told me 2 weeks ago he walked into that meeting, and everybody was embracing forestry. He said it was one of the most relieving things I've done in my career, to see the folks that used to sit on the other side of the table, point their finger, throw tomatoes, and look at us like we were the worst thing on the planet, now saying, we love you. Keep doing what you're doing. What an awesome opportunity for us as an industry to take that to the next level. On the trade side, we're fortunate, and you'll hear a lot more about this today from Cliff Pyron. He's one of our trustees for the foundation, but he's the Chief Commercial Officer for the Georgia Ports Authority. The ports are working tirelessly to grow. We're 4th in the nation today, but we're one of the most, or if not the most efficient port system in the nation. We have 2 railheads, the only port in the nation that has 2 separate railheads that come into it. Incredible rail network, a lot of road infrastructure, a great footprint there that's all unified into one area, and a plan to double that footprint in 2 years. The port dredging is happening. We heard from Senator Perdue about that yesterday. So a lot of impressive growth for us in our infrastructure and our ability to get products out of the state to global customers. Once again, it matters when they think and they know and we can prove we're sustainable. That's one of the keys to have that global market access. But for us, the inland port in particular is something that we've been watching a good deal. What happens when we have an inland port that allows you to land timber for export, logs for export, as competitively as if you delivered them right into the port of Savannah? But instead you're going into Ringgold, Georgia. Instead of sourcing from the coast where you've got a lot of constrained markets like we saw in the forest slide, you're actually pulling from western North Carolina, or Tennessee, or the northern stretches of Georgia. What if instead of all pine, we're actually talking about a mix of pine and hardwood? So for the landowners in that region that have seen a lot of mills closing over the past 2 decades, this represents a new opportunity, and hopefully an important opportunity also to rebuild our service infrastructure in that part of the state. More loggers, more truck drivers, more consultants, more folks that can help make sure that we're doing it sustainably, we're doing it right, and we're delivering products to market. This was another slide that was also provided by Forest as well as Catchmark. It's a bit of a variation of the slide we saw before. What makes this one different is this is a snapshot of where we are today. So this is looking at the dark green is where you have a lot of demand, and so that growth where you have a constrained market, you can see there. And then the yellow is where you have a plentiful or low demand scenario, plentiful amount of timber available. That's what it looks like today. The folks at Catchmark were kind enough to share a little bit of their vision of what the future might look like. But basically what you can see there is in this slide, Alabama and Mississippi in particular, and the southern part of Georgia all get a lot greener. I'll go back one just to there we go. So just to try that. So once again, Alabama, Mississippi, pretty yellow. A lot of available timber. The southern half of Georgia, fairly green. And then as we move forward, you start seeing the southern half of Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia getting a lot greener. So once again, what does this tell us? Georgia is extremely well positioned. We're growing 50% more trees than we harvest today. In some pockets of the state, it's over 250% more trees than we harvest today. But we see a better future for those timber landowners coming, hopefully, with all the investments. Once again, 1/3 of all the sawmill announcements coming to this state, hopefully to help prop up and make sure that we can do this not only sustainably from the environmental perspective, but from the economic perspective as well. So we're structured to grow. And this is what GFA is really focused in on. As we look at this time lapse here, you can see 1990, 1901, it goes year by year. This is population change in the state of Georgia. Now, what is driving this? Well, the Olympics helped in some ways, but what's driving this is we're a hot economy. We're a hot commodity. We have an awesome university system. We have despite all its traffic and challenges, a great city in Atlanta. Great cities in Athens, Savannah, Valdosta, Albany, other places around Macon, other places around the state, our 10 metro areas. And if you don't want to live in those places, there's a lot of other places that are rural that have easy access to urban areas. But what we see is that also this change in demographics also starts informing a lot of the other things. It means we probably have more diverse workforces that can work in international-based companies, that can get on the phone and work with a team based in Germany, or a team based in South Africa, or a team based in China, wherever it may be. But it also means that as that diversity starts coming in, we start seeing maybe preferences also electorally and politically. And so this is an important message, because you can see what we look like by 2050 there in that final slide. A very, very, very different picture than where we've been since 1990 and years prior. So what have I spent the last 3 years at GFA doing? I've spent time, and we have spent the time as a team, and your board and the executive committee have spent time endorsing this work to make sure that we are in a position to win. It doesn't matter who's in charge, if it's Republicans or Democrats or independents or something else that comes up. We got to be positioned to win no matter who is in charge. We'll always support our friends and do whatever we need to do, but we need to make sure that we deliver results. That's what, at the end of the day, that's what really matters. And so we do that in multiple different ways. Our forest pack has grown tremendously. We've gone from a very, very, not totally sleepy, but a small forest pack to one that is now respected. And we did some benchmarking work. Our intern, Robert Massenberg, is back in the back. Raise your hand, Robert. He's a MFR student at UGA, Warnell. He did some benchmarking work for us this year, and we compared ourselves to the Georgia Chamber, ACCG, a variety of other organizations. And we said, okay, how's our PAC doing? How's our foundation doing? How do we lobby? How do we communicate compared to these organizations? Turns out number one, we're highly efficient. And number two, we're punching way above our weight. The chamber has 47,000 members. To join their PAC, you have to pay $15,000 to be a chairman on their board. We don't have those. We don't have that same structure, right? We got 2,400 members. And we do have a board structure for joining the PAC and a donation limit or threshold. But we are getting close to getting very competitive with an organization like the Chamber in terms of how our PAC operates. Now, what does that give us? That gives us political access in some ways, and a lot louder voice when it comes to having access to tell your story, to tell our story, to let them know what our problems are, let them know where our pinch points are, let them know where we need help. Our politicians, especially the leaders that we have right now in the House and Senate, thank you, Leader Burns, they listen and they care. And when we bring a real problem to them with facts and data to back it up, they want to do something to help us every single day of the week, believe me. Awesome leadership today. So for us, that forest pack is a way to support them and make sure that we can drive change at the Capitol. Our forest resources teams is what that stands for. It's very important. Having a grassroots team that can work at the county level with the locally elected officials, House and Senate members, and others is huge. It's one thing if Andres gets on the phone and I'm talking to one of our House or Senate members. I mean, that matters, right? It's totally different when a voter in their district talks to them. When you talk to them in your district, that drives their decision making way more than anything I can do. When we're both saying the same thing, believe me, then it gets really loud. And so that fort is our opportunity to have that grassroots penetration into the way our politics and our democracy in the state is structured. This is structural, working within the structure that our founding fathers created to allow us to be effective. And lastly, the foundation. And you've heard me say this before, But when we're at the Capitol, we're blocking and tackling. And that's making changes that we're doing things that work that's 1, 2, 3 years ahead of us. And sometimes it's one day ahead of us. But that's for here and now. And yeah, it affects us long term. But the foundation for us is how we talk to 10 million Georgians. It's how we get 10 million Georgians to believe that everything we do, and know it in their hearts, is sustainable. And know that when they're buying that using that paper cup or that paper bag or mass timber, that they're doing something good for Georgia's forests, our forest landowners, our wildlife, our air, and our water resources, and a bunch of people that depend on our industry for jobs, our rural economy. That's what we want them to take home. That's the decision that they make when they go to the ballot box. That's the decision that they make when they go to the grocery store. That's the decision when they make when they decide what kind of lumber they're going to use. That's what the foundation is about. And that's what informs us for this generation, the next generation, and the one after that. Because think about it. Where did we learn a lot of our values? From our parents, right? And when you have a mom or a dad telling their kid, hey, this is good, or you have a kid telling their mom or dad that this is good, then you've got that generation and the one after it. That's why this is so powerful. Because the forest pack and the fort, that's winning the battle. The forest foundation is winning the war. That's that long term that we have to get to that 2050 when our population, our state looks very different. Atlanta has continued to grow and it's probably already in Alabama. And we're seeing how do we maintain our position as the #1 forestry state in the nation. The other component of that is, it's at the end of the day, like all of our companies, it's about people. And we have an awesome team. Richard Royal, thank you so much for the work that you've done for us over the many years. Tom Byer, you back here somewhere? There you are, Tom. Thank you for the wonderful work that you've done. But we try and make sure that we're always representing the values, the ethics, and the business needs of our industry when we go to the Capitol. We're going to do that with honesty and integrity. And I tell you that you don't need to have 50 lobbyists. You don't need to have the most expensive contract lobbyists. You just need to have good lobbyists. You just have good people. And that's what we've got right now. And we're going to keep this team together to make sure that we can deliver that value long term for this industry. So we talked a little bit about changes that are happening on the political side with new people getting elected to office. But those changes that are happening because people get burned out easily, they're that pressures from social media, from whatever it is, the low return reward sometime, I guess maybe for being an elected official, that also kind of extends to other places. We're seeing more turnover, not only in elected officials, but in agency heads and people in my roles, the people that head up associations and groups that we have to work with. We're seeing a turnover there that's at a pretty rapid clip. The U.S. Forest Service, federal government agencies, have a lot of retirees that are a lot of employees that are close to retirement age. And so that also means that for us, we've got to be able to communicate not only in a way that builds personal relationships, but what happens when one side of that personal relationship's gone or has moved on to something else. We've got to be able to communicate in ways that transcend the individual. And we do that by messaging. We do that by having a message that anybody from any walk of life, from any level of education, from any level of wealth, from any level of privilege, from any level of our society that we live in, that they can connect to. And I can tell you that this message of being the #1 forestry state in the nation not only generates pride in each and every one of you in this room, it generates a tremendous amount of pride in people in Atlanta. A tremendous amount of pride in school teachers. A tremendous amount of pride in grade school kids. This is the message that for us transcends that individual relationship that we have to have sometimes with people, so that new head of the Conservancy knows, forestry matters to the state. That next director of the EPD says, forestry is part of our water solutions. That new director, the next director, well, I want to keep Mark Williams as long as we can, but the next director of DNR, same thing. This is important for wildlife resources, but important for recreation, important for that $4.8 billion that we get every year from recreational investments. So for us, this is our way to connect to a lot of folks, and no matter who's in the driver's seat, we always have that opportunity to be important to them, to matter, to not be swept up under the rug and forgotten. Very critical for us. So preach it loud. When you go back to your work and you go back to your community, you go wherever, and you need us to help you do it, preach it loud. So we should be, when we say these messages too as well, a lot of what we say also is about letting people know that forestry matters to every single heartbeat in the state of Georgia. For every one of us depend on forestry for our survival, air and water we breathe, and the shelter we live in, our comfort, a variety of different products we use on a daily basis, and our progress. Where is that taking us into the future? What does our progress look like when our cell phone screens are made out of nanocellulose? When Tomahawk missile warheads are made out of cellulose? When a whole host of other things that are light and strong that may get us to Mars, that may be a big part of our next mission to the moon, that may be a huge part of how we communicate via technology. All of those things matter, and that's part of our progress. So that's today, that's tomorrow, and that's well into the future, the next generation. So we've been working really hard, working with Georgia Public Broadcasting to bring that message into the classroom in different ways. And so with GPB, we worked on creating a virtual forestry classroom. You can turn the volume up, it's fine. Hopefully. And that virtual forestry classroom does exactly that, but it does it at a scale we've never been able to achieve in the past. A scale that gives us direct access, but you can see here that brings life, brings forestry, brings wildlife, brings cellular biology into people's minds in ways that we've never been able to do before. And most importantly, for teachers and for students, it's super engaging, it's super fun, and it's easy to use. And so there's a lot of elements to this where we've built it to state educational standards, STEAM standards, a whole variety of different things. But for us, when you're inside these spaces, we're meeting the future of education. This is what you can sign up for in the forestry booth. Getting one of these goggles and all the technology associated with it into your local elementary school. Phase 1, we built the curriculums and we delivered to teachers. We had about 1,300 teachers in 9 months get trained on this. And that's only going to continue to grow. Phase 2 for us is getting VR goggles. So just like you just saw in that example where you can see things come to life right in front of you with an iPad or with goggles, you'll also be able to go on multiple forestry experiences. You'll be able to go on a drone above IFCO's nursery in Moultrie. And I can't tell you how incredibly realistic it is to feel like you're 200 feet above the earth, looking down on trees, flying over them at 50 miles an hour. You'll be able to ride in an ATV and on land that's close to Blackshear, Georgia, riding 15, 20, 30, 40, 50 miles an hour down a forest trail to know what it's like to be in recreation. You'll be able to get on a log truck and go from a logging site all the way to a mill to know what it's like to drive a truck in 360 degrees. You can look up, down, anywhere you want to understand what that's like. You'll be able to see what an outside of a pulp mill looks like as well and what it's like to be in that space. So for us, it's a huge opportunity to bring the forest and the forest community into the classroom in ways that we've never been able to do. There's 1.2 million school children in the state of Georgia. We can't get all of them out into the woods. And we should keep trying, but we can definitely get a $250 pair of goggles into their classroom. That's way easier. So please think about signing up for your school, your local school, to have a pair of goggles. You can see Brady Hummel. I'm not sure if he's in the room right now, but he's manning the foundation booth, and he can also give you an example of what that looks like there. Thank you, Matt. So that a little bit about that. You can try it yourself too as well. And so what are we doing in terms of influencing workforce? Well, one part of that is Director Williams yesterday from the Forestry Commission mentioned the technical training programs that are going on with Coastal Pines and also Southwest Georgia Technical College. We need to grow those. We've made that message clear to some of our elected leaders that are part of the Rural Development Council and the House of Representatives, that this is an opportunity for us in other parts of the state. I'm particularly been hearing a lot of noise coming from the northwest Rome region of the state about bringing these programs further north. But also virtual tours as we grow. So the third phase of our GPB experience is really going to be taking this to the high school level. We did 3rd through 6th grade in phase 1 and 2. Now we want to go to the high school level. Now why does that matter? Because that's where your next employers are coming from. When we can show high school kids what it's like to work in our industry, they don't have to think that the only 4 jobs in the world that exist is being a musician, a professional athlete, a doctor, and a lawyer. That's exactly what most kids and this is, tons of polls show you, that's about what they think exists. But what we're doing is we're creating a game. So in the high school curriculum, we'll have a high school curriculum built for teachers and students to the state standards. We'll have a bunch of virtual reality tours. But the most exciting thing that we're going to bring, and this is innovative, this doesn't exist anywhere in the country. This will be a fully immersed game, probably with some 3D in there too, or goggles as well and things like that, where you can be a mill manager, you can be a land manager, or you can be a logging manager or logger. And every day in this game, you're faced with five scenarios that are throwing all kinds of things at you. Real world stuff that we have to deal with every day. Financial, human resources, operations, legal and ethical, and lastly, how are we good agents in our community? How are we connected to the community around us? So high schoolers get to play this game, they get immersed in it. The best example I can give you, if you can remember playing Oregon Trail when we were in school, I think most of us can, and how much fun and how much we look forward to that. This is that on steroids times 10,000. Kids will come out of that knowing what it's like to be a mill manager, knowing what it's like to have to deal with issues on a logging job, knowing what it's like to have to manage land and all the things that go into that. And they will have a direct glimpse. And hopefully, if we get 5% of them coming out that are confident about this, we'll have a great opportunity to bring them directly into our industry, where the cream of the crop for us stays in rural Georgia. And they don't have to go to Atlanta. We get the top 5, 10%, and Atlanta can get the bottom 80, 90%. Today it's kind of the opposite, right? In many cases, so those who had to hire. I used to run a mill, I know how hard that is. So let's try and make sure we can give them that opportunity to fill those high-tech jobs and stay at home. One of the other slides we had showed that moving forward over the next 5 years, rural job growth drops from that 3% I showed you to 1.9%. It also shows that urban job growth, mostly in Atlanta, grows from that 10 up to about 12%. So we'll have way more pressure on our rural population to stay rural and keep working there. We need to give them that option. We need to show them what that's like. Lastly, when we talk about changing consumer preferences, this is pretty powerful, and I love these ads. This is work that Matt worked on and had some help from our consulting firm, HL Strategy. Thank you, Howard, for being here. He's up here in the front row. He can tell you how they made these. But this is leveraging exactly what our consumers are telling us already. I want to buy things that are sustainable. I want to make good decisions as a consumer. I want to teach my kids to make the right choice. We've been doing this for 10 years about eating healthy. Now is your healthy food packaged sustainably, right? Or whatever we consume. So, a good example of this is how we talk about mass timber in this ad. Something big is coming to Atlanta. People in Atlanta love things that are new, and really generally anywhere, right? When a fast food restaurant opens in rural Georgia somewhere, or rural anywhere, there's always a line to get in for the first month, right? And so, same thing here with mass timber. People get excited about that. When we talk about, paper straws, more than lip service. This is not just a feel-good thing. We're telling people, hey, this is actually good for the environment in a lot of ways. And when we talk about printing your email, counteracting that message that we've seen on millions of emails, circulated billions or trillions or whatever comes after that, times around the earth that don't print this email, think about what you're doing, we can actually tell people the exact opposite, and it's absolutely true. That's what we have to do to get to that next level. So for us, where's GFA going to be? Well, we're going to continue doing exactly what's got us where we're at. We're going to continue being the leading advocate for a healthy business and political environment for the state of Georgia. We're going to do that in every single way we can. We're always going to adhere to our core principles of private property rights, sensible taxes and regulations, and healthy markets. That's what got us here. That's what's going to keep us going. And that's probably true for a lot of business for that matter. And we're going to continue refining our vision every 3 years. You'll see a new vision come out at the end of this year, beginning of next year. This is part of what it'll start looking like. We've been working on that all year. But communications will be the new bucket that we're adding to it because it's a very critical part of what we do. I tell Matt all the time, you can do good work, but if no one knows about it, it doesn't matter. It didn't happen. We've got to communicate. And so lastly for us, what are the things that you can do? What's the call to action here as I try and wrap up and get us close to being back on time? Is really, I mentioned the role of the pack. you can support that. The role of the foundation is a much bigger role, much larger financial lift for us. But that's probably where we need your help the most. Because, once again, the PAC, that's basically about 300 elected officials in Atlanta. The foundation is 10 million Georgians. We've proven we can do that extremely effectively and very efficiently. But it's not free, and it never will be. And this is an investment in our future, but more importantly, it has a return on investment for you. It's where your next employers are going to come from. It's where your next customers are coming from. It's where we become more competitive in our supply chain. It's where we become and make sure that we stay the #1 forestry state in the nation. So that's highly critical that you remember that. And if there's one message I'd like you to take away from here, it's that. Join in the fort. The stronger we grow at that local level, the stronger we are. And remember, look back 30, 40, 50 years ago. Who was your county commissioner? Or your county commissioners, I should say. A lot of them were farmers. A lot of them were forest landowners. You might have a mix or two in there of a doctor or a lawyer, but for the most part, it was us that ran these counties. Look at your county commissioners today. Sometimes it's hard to find a forest landowner that's running your county. It's hard to find a farmer there. We're not only outnumbered in Atlanta, sometimes we're outnumbered in our own backyard. So joining that fort is a critical way to make sure we're elevating our voice. And like I said, once again, when that voice is echoed by the things that we say at state level, that makes it that much more powerful. The stronger we make this fort, the more we can level the playing field when it comes to forestry issues in the state of Georgia. And I can tell you that'll be even more important as we see political change, as we continue to see more demographic change, as we continue to see more urbanization. We've built something that works here, but it doesn't work without you. That's true for the PAC, it's true for the foundation, and it's true for the fort. And lastly, once again, the more people we have, the better off we are. So we're going to be working hard on recruiting new members. There's a lot of technological solutions today to reaching people. There's 450,000 landowners in the state of Georgia. About 85% of them are never looking for help. They're just kind of off the grid. 15% of them, this is according to the American Forest Foundation, at any given time are looking for support, are looking for information, are needing something. And where do we go to find our answers? Google. So where we want to be is where they're at. We want them to be able to find us. And data mining, strategic placement through information, I guess the placement through Facebook and all the other social medias that are out there, Instagram and whatever else is out there. I don't use any of that, so I'm getting a little bit out of my depth here. But the point is, we know that we can use technology and we can leverage and we can harness opportunities to reach people where they're at and get them on board with us. But that also starts with you. So that's it for me. Hopefully that gives you some hope for where we're going. But more importantly, it shows you that we are trying to make sure that we're constantly adjusting to what's coming down the pipeline. We can do a lot of things to block and tackle and put out fires that are here right in front of us today. But we got to make sure that we're ready for what's coming down the pipeline 5, 10, 15, 20, and ultimately 50 years from now. So that never stops being the case. So thank you so much for your time.